Donkey Kong Bonanza is really fun. What's a Donkey Kong game? I'm Bobby, this is Shiny Brain, and today we're going to kind of walk through the history of Donkey Kong games and just how different they are. I mean, when you think back to the original arcade cabinet, where allegedly Donkey Kong Jr. or Crazy Kong, you know what? Executive decision, we're not going into the Donkey Kong timeline in this video, because doing so will make your head hurt. Original Donkey Kong game, someone named Donkey Kong, is up there throwing barrels at Jumpman, and he's got Pauline actually in a cage. And Jumpman is the hero of the game. Donkey Kong is the villain. You are trying to get the damsel away from the distress that is Donkey Kong. And there were a couple more games, and the platforming got a little bit more interesting, more complex. But then we didn't really hear from the series again until Rare. Took it over for the Super Nintendo with those iconic, almost perfect Donkey Kong Country games for the Super Nintendo. These games, if you're my age, I think are probably some of the earliest gaming memories if you had access to them from the Super Nintendo. I mean, that first Donkey Kong Country game with the soundtrack and, with that opening level where you go back in, you get the balloon from that tree house, and you get the Kong and letters, and you instantly get the idea of the game. Yes, you're going from left to right and you're jumping on people like Mario, but this one's got more to it. There's collecting, there's secrets. It is a different kind of game. And Donkey Kong has specific abilities, and Diddy has specific abilities. And then Rare did an amazingly interesting thing. For the next one, they took Donkey Kong out. Donkey Kong is not in Donkey Kong Country 2. It's Diddy and Trixie, which is just a really risky thing to do if you're Rare. And I think for the most part it works. I was always a little disappointed that Donkey Kong wasn't in it, but I understood the premise. Hey, you got to get Donkey Kong. You got to rescue him this time. And Trixie made things interesting where she's able to, helicopter around, and it makes the platforming a little easier. I never thought the platforming in the first game was like outrageously difficult, but I could see the appeal. Donkey Kong 3 did it again. They totally revamped the playable characters. You're not playing as Donkey or Diddy, and you get to traverse the overworld a little bit more. And in 2 and 3, they kind of lean more into the secrets and collecting special kinds of coins to unlock more levels. And, sure, Mario had certain elements of these things, but I think Donkey Kong set itself on its own just in the presentation, the graphical style of the, pre-rendered 2D animated sprites that Rare did that looked so good. And I thought they had a pretty great thing going. Those games were released only 2 years apart each. That's kind of incredible when you think about how things work today. Donkey Kong. Then the Nintendo 64 and Donkey Kong 64. And for the Nintendo 64, it was pretty clear the edict was, we're taking our 2D games and we're making them 3D. I mean, it seemed like there was there was pressure, and it just felt like 2D was yesterday's technology and we got to move forward, and moving forward is 3D. And Donkey Kong 64 gets maligned for maybe having some of the worst instincts of 3D platformers turned up to 11 in this game. So if you have never played it, there are 5 playable characters. So Donkey Kong's back, Diddy Kong is back, and you can play as those two again, really for the first time since Donkey Kong Country. But everyone's got their own collectibles, and you got to collect a lot. And it turns into a lot of backtracking, and it just becomes a little tedious, and it outweighs the fun. There's a lot of level diversity. It is an interesting game, but it just wore people down, and it always kind of felt second to Rare's other 3D platformers on the N64, the Banjo games. You know, it felt like the Banjo games maybe were what Rare thought was possible with a 3D platformer, and maybe the Donkey Kong games were a little too much like, well, this is what we want to try to do because it's Donkey Kong. Then Microsoft buys Rare and things get even weirder. So we've already talked about how things have kind of like changed depending on the platform. But GameCube honestly just felt like a lost era for Donkey Kong. We got two different kinds of Donkey Kong games, and I mean different kinds of Donkey Kong games. There were the Donkey Konga games, which were a rhythm game controlled by bongos. Came prepackaged with, this little set of bongos you plugged in like a controller, and, it's DDR for your hands. Then there was Donkey Kong Jungle Beat, also controlled by bongos, where you could smack it to one direction, smack it to the other direction to go left or right, and you could hit them at the same time to jump and clap, and those were the only means of controlling it. And I gotta tell you, my hand hurts just thinking about that. So Nintendo really experiments, I guess is the polite way of putting it, with Donkey Kong during the GameCube era, but we don't get what feels like a proper game. Fast forward to the Wii, and Retro Studios of Metroid Prime fame comes in to save the day. Donkey Kong Country Returns was awesome, but it also was very different from what we'd had. Okay, yes, it was Donkey Kong, it was Diddy Kong, it was 2D, side-scrolling, just like the original Donkey Kong Country games, but it was hard. And I think Retro decided, we're gonna make Donkey Kong difficult. That was gonna be their stamp on it, because they had, the minecart levels, and they had kind of the traditional aesthetic of the jungle in that game. But to put their own stamp on it, they were like, what if you didn't see this deadly enemy until like 14 frames before it killed you? And what if you didn't realize that the platform you're going to need to jump to in order to advance through this level doesn't show up for about, 42 frames before you have to jump? And that was tough. And I think a lot of people found it maybe a little cruel. I appreciated it just because I like Donkey Kong games, and I'm like, you know what, if you want to make these hard platformers, I'm okay with that, because it was especially creating its own lane when compared to the Mario games. At the time, Mario was doing the new Super Mario series, which was on the DS and the Wii and would come to the Wii U, and those games were pants-poopingly easy. Those were pretty close to press A to win platformers, and Donkey Kong was more challenging, and I understood that, but it did change Donkey Kong. And in Wii U, for the Wii U, Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze comes out, and it's HD for the first time in Donkey Kong series, but otherwise, it is sort of a by-the-numbers sequel to the Wii game. It's a different aesthetic, the whole, frozen over thing, and some of the enemies are different, which is, interesting, but not meaningfully different, I don't think. I mean, those two games feel very similar, to the point where when that was revealed as Retro's project, a lot of people back in that time were a little disappointed, because they thought maybe Retro would be doing a Metroid Prime 4 or taking a big swing at something else, as opposed to what seemed to be just kind of another one of Donkey Kong Country Returns. I was happy to get it. I played through it, and I beat it on the Wii U, and then I played it again on the Switch, and I appreciated having it. But again, it's different. The franchise is really changing depending on the platform it's on. It skips the Switch. Nothing but ports. We get the two Retro games ported there in HD for full price. Different video. And then the Switch 2 comes around, and we get the April Direct. and we learn that the team behind Mario Odyssey, which by the way also created Jungle Beat, is making an open world 3D Donkey Kong game. And you're like, okay, first time 3D for Donkey Kong since 64 when everyone got mad that you had to collect too much stuff. And now that I've played through it, while I really like it, I don't know what this is. I don't know that this is a Donkey Kong game. I say that because it's so different from anything that this series has been. Okay, it's Donkey Kong. Sure. Diddy's not really in it. Trixie's not really in it. You're not really riding other animals. You can transform into other animals, but it's different. And it kind of comes back to when this team was told, hey, we want you to make a Donkey Kong game. They went to Shigeru Miyamoto, who famously made that first arcade cabinet, and asked, what is Donkey Kong? Like, what makes Donkey Kong him? And Miyamoto's answer was so interesting. He said that it's Donkey Kong's strength and he smashes stuff. And not to disagree with the creator, I just don't know that that's ever really been a thing. You go back to the Donkey Kong Country games and he's like, okay, he can jump on certain enemies and kill them. And if Diddy jumps on those same enemies, Diddy's smaller, those enemies laugh at him, which, okay, I can see there's a little bit of strength with that. But otherwise, I'm not sure that I've ever seen that, really be a big theme of these games. Obviously, bananas are a theme of the games. Nature is a theme of the game. And animals, kind of living together, I think are all themes, and some of those are presented in this new game. Weirdly, rocks are kind of like the most apparent kind of inhabitants of this world, which I guess makes sense if your whole thing is that you're going like underneath the Earth's crust and you're going down to the planet core. Rocks, sure, whatever. I like Donkey Kong Bananza a lot. There's collecting like there has been in every Donkey Kong game, but it isn't the same kind of collecting. It's not nearly as essential. Sure, the bananas will unlock skill tree stuff and you can get more Bonanza power, you can get more Bonanza time, you can unlock certain combos, you could carry more potions. But you beat the game and a lot of that skill tree is empty. I mean, a lot of it's not essential. It just isn't. You're able to respec it whenever you want, which I think is a nice modern touch. The Bonanza stuff also is different. I don't think, maybe unless you're going to say, Donkey Kong 64 when you're changing all the characters, I don't think you've had access to such a wide variety of different types of powers and movement. And it brings me, like, it sounds like I'm building towards I don't like Bonanza. I like it a lot. IGN can calm down with it being a 10 out of 10. I would probably give it more like an 8 or a 9. But it's interesting the way that Donkey Kong over the years has changed what it is based on the console that it's on. The feel of the games has been so radically different with each iteration on each console. And it just makes you wonder, what is next for Donkey Kong? This game was a huge hit, but so was Mario Odyssey, which this team just worked on. And it doesn't seem like we're getting Mario Odyssey 2 anytime soon. Is someone at Nintendo going, all right, what's Bonanza 2? Or, is this the Donkey Kong we're getting for this generation? And, for the next generation of Nintendo hardware, are we going to get another one that's like 2D again, that's a side scroller? Or, is it going to be a 3D platformer that is like this? Or, more like Donkey Kong 64, or just completely different? I mean, that's kind of my point, is that with Mario games, what a 3D Mario is, what a 2D Mario is. But Donkey Kong's 3D and 2D entries have A, been way fewer and further between, and B, are so different even within their own categories. I just appreciate that Nintendo is still working on this series. I know that, as fans, we can't get everything we want, but I would love more Donkey Kong games more often. Maybe it's just comfort food for me because I grew up playing it, but I love a proper Donkey Kong game. And while I think that can be hard to define, it's easy to tell when Nintendo is ignoring the franchise like it did on the GameCube. And it's not, and the Switch, really. And, hopefully it's not about to do that again just because it's checked the box on the Switch too. But anyway, what do you think? What's your favorite Donkey Kong era? Do you like the SNES era? Do you like the N64? Did you like Donkey Kong Jungle Beat? Am I weird for not liking that game? I just think the controls are too odd to really like. Or were you a fan of the retro games, or do you think that Bonanza is where Donkey Kong should go from now on? Let me know. We'll talk about it in the comments. I'm sure you've got some great ideas. And if you're thinking about picking up a really interesting Switch port, Madden 26 just came out. And it's a big bellwether for the future of Switch third-party games. I'll tell you more, and I'll tell you what I thought about it right here in this video.